Hi guys, this is a video tutorial on fire, smoke and explosion effects. So hopefully after you follow this video you'll be pretty comfortable creating pyro effects from the shelf tool. Um, so I'm just gonna go right in and start here. So usually when you work with pyro you want to think about the scale. So if you're doing like a large scale smoke or fire, you want to have your emitter be a reasonable size, and also when you start emitting you want your explosion or smoke to cover a big area. So since we covered the fire last class, I'm just gonna go in and start explaining the explosion, but the actual anatomy of the solver is exactly the same. So you have your fuel, your temperature, and then that causes the burning process, and then in the burning process you're getting the explosive energy that creates fire and smoke. So let's start. I'm going to create a sphere emitter. So control click. So right now if I go inside the sphere node, my sphere is 0.5 meters. So every value in Houdini is in meters. That's a good thing to know. So I'm just gonna make it around 2 meters, maybe 1.5, and I'm going to squash it like this, maybe 35, and I'm gonna change type to polygon, so it's all triangles, and I'm gonna add some more triangles. Okay. Next I'm gonna add mountain, just making the emitter a bit more interesting. So yeah, something like this, maybe like that. So it looks like some kind of thing that's gonna explode. And then I'm gonna lift it above the ground just slightly. You're gonna know why in a couple of minutes. I'm gonna go to transform. So something like that. Maybe 75. Okay. And after we created our emitter, if you're using a shelf tool approach, it's very easy. You just have to go out of your emitter, and let's just call this explosion emitter. And we go to Pyro effects shelf tool, click on explosion, and it's going to tell select the base of the fireball, must be an object, and then press enter. So we just basically need to select this and click enter, and here Houdini is going to do the magic for us. So right away you can see that it put us into the dynamics network, and like I described in class, you have your Pyro object, Pyro solver and source, and your container. So let's just play and see what we have. Don't forget to turn on real time. Let's play. So obviously it looks like something is exploding, but currently the visualization isn't the best. So we're gonna work on that before we tweak any simulation settings. So I'm gonna go back. So just like with the smoke and fire, shelf tool created for us these two nodes, and inside we have all this goodness for the emitter, for the explosion emitter. So I'm gonna turn this visibility off, so we just see the explosion, and right away I'm going to create a light. Always when you work with volumes, create lights. I'm gonna change type from point to distant, and as you can see right now the light is in front, pointing in front, so I'm just going to rotate it like that, and I'm just gonna move it a bit, 10, and then I'm gonna go inside here, and just like you remember from class, this is importing our visualization from Dynamics, and this node is actually what brings in all the fields, so this is the one we need to work with. So I'm just gonna delete this since we don't need. We're gonna create our own visualization, and right away you can see like we're getting like a dense cloud, but this cloud actually has a lot of information in it. If you middle mouse click, you can see we have all these fields. We have density, velocity, temperature, heat, and fuel. So for visualization we're gonna use heat and temperature and density. So I'm gonna put a volume visualization, and then the only thing you need to do after you create this node is put in all the fields in here. So I'm gonna put density. In the emission, first one is heat, the second one is temperature, and don't forget to turn on the heat, and right away you start seeing that this hot area is actually where the fire is going to be. We just need to color it properly. So first thing, in the temperature is what's responsible for the color. We just need to enable this preset, which is black body, and then we just need to specify enough range, because just like with particles, this works pretty much like age. So in order to see this gradient mapped properly, we need to find the right range. So I'm just gonna enable this, and I'm gonna start playing, and you can start seeing that we're getting colors slowly in. So I would say around 8.5. So that means that at 0.5 value of temperature, this is what it is at its current state. And also for the explosion, usually the smoke is slightly darker. So what I do, I just disable this. So sorry, you could just right click and delete. Oh, looks like it doesn't delete. So you could just drag down and it will get rid of this. And then if I double click on this one, I can choose like a darker, not a green obviously, unless you want your explosion to be green. And now we can just play with the smoke density and shadow. But before, let's tweak some simulation settings. I'm gonna set a camera. So maybe something. I'm not sure, maybe something like that. But for your assignment, your final assignment is going to be a explosive destruction effect. So your explosion is going to be in the distance. So actually, let's put it in the distance. Let's have it somewhere. Oh, in here. So imagine this is going to be your plate. And let's create a ground plane. So we're gonna go grid. This is gonna be our ground. I'm gonna go in, make the size like that. And now let's tweak some simulation settings. I'm gonna get off the camera view. I'm gonna zoom in a bit. Like that. So currently our explosion is going down as well. It's gonna go down if we continue. I mean, obviously because of buoyancy it's gonna go up, but we want to limit and make it collide with the ground. So in the Pyro Sim Dynamics network, first thing I'm gonna do, obviously if you remember, we need to go to this container in the max bounds and disable this. So if at any point there's like a limit, explosion doesn't hit it. So yeah, the container will just grow infinitely. The second thing we need to do for the ground plane, just gonna type in ground plane, sorry, ground plane, like that. And very important, in dynamics network, all the collisions have to go on the left, because the order of operation is from left to right, top down. So even if it connected like that, see, it's not actually affecting from the very left. So in here we just need to make sure that the ground plane is above, is in front, so like that. So only this way the collision would work properly. And we have to do left inputs affect right inputs. Okay, let's see. Okay, now our explosion is colliding with the ground. You can see it spreads out way more, which is nice. See, this completely changed the look, and this is what we want. So now let's actually go to the simulation settings, and I'm just gonna go over some of them. You should know the majority of them. So time scale, as you can see, time scale is dialed down because the default is 1. And since this is dialed down, it will make it feel that the explosion is pretty big and it's moving pretty slow. So we can actually lower it even more. We can put it like 0.5, so it's even slower. The other thing you could do, you could animate this parameter. So in the beginning it will be pretty fast, everything will gonna be fast, and in the end it's gonna be 0.5. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to frame 3. I'm going to put this to 1, alt click to animate, set a key, and then after 8 frames, maybe after 7 frames, I'm going to put it to 0.5. And now we'll have time animated. So in the beginning, everything, the fuel, the disturbance will kick in very fast, and then it will slow down. The other important thing in here from the default smoke, or if you just create a default Pyro solver, the temperature diffusion is pretty low. This temperature diffusion is actually the difference between air and very hot core, or like the edge of the explosion. So usually when you have something very hot, like a hot volume, this difference should be pretty low. Cooling rate is self-explanatory, is how fast the explosion will cool down and dissipate. Viscosity obviously has to be 0 because this is not an ink drop effect. And buoyancy is basically how fast the smoke and fire is going to rise, and this is your buoyancy direction. So next, in the combustion field, this is where the magic happens. So right away, in comparison to our smoke and fire simulation from Shelf Tools, you could see one thing different. You can see that this gas released is already animated. Usually we had it in a pretty low value for fire, like maybe 5 or 3. But for explosions, it's very important to have it pretty high in the beginning, and then, you know, reasonably low, but not very low. So it continue expanding. So basically, gas release is how much you can see the expansion. So see, we start from this little sphere, and because of the gas is at 100. Remind you, like the default is 15. 100 will inject so much oxygen into the fuel that it will just expand like that and cause this shape. And then you could see that it's animated actually from 100 to 20. So this comes from the shelf. I would keep this unless you're doing a very custom explosions from particles. That would be a bit different. But for this approach, this works pretty nice. And these values would work in 80% of time, so I wouldn't touch them unless you're doing like something very custom. Flame height is basically how long the flames are gonna linger after the explosion. So this number is actually pretty arbitrary. It doesn't say, oh, 6 meters or 6 seconds or something. It just means that, okay, 6 is the current flame lingering value. If you want more, increase it. If you want less, decrease it. Now let's go to smoke. Like as you can see, the dense smoke option enabled automatically. in comparison to fire. We actually need it for the explosion, and these settings are all correct, so I wouldn't touch any of these unless you want a different look like a fireball, which will actually has this. So actually I encourage you to go in and play with the fireball shelf tool after watching this tutorial. It's gonna be slightly different. It's gonna be like a mushroom cloud shooting up, but it's a pretty cool setup as well. And now the only thing we're gonna change in this is actually the shape. So we're gonna add some disturbance. Shredding is basically how many fire details we're getting. Turbulence is general air turbulence that we covered with smoke. And confinement just actually increases the swirling details in the smoke and fire. So all these settings we actually covered in class, so I encourage you go and play with them, but don't go too far from the shelf defaults. Well, mainly you want to play with the settings just to understand what's gonna happen if you dial them really up or down, but for the actual explosion effect I would just keep them like this. So I might play with the disturbance, make it higher or lower, and shredding, but the rest are pretty much set for you. So only thing you need to do is play with buoyancy, how much it goes up or down, and maybe how much smoke you want. Right now also we need to go to the Pyro object, and this is where we control our resolution. So our resolution right now is pretty low. If I middle mouse click on this, it says we only have 100,000 voxels. So anything under 1,000,000 is pretty low res, right? And once you start going 1,000,000, 2,000,000, 5 or 10,000,000, you're starting slowly to go into a high res area. For this assignment, since the camera view isn't super close, you can get away with a mid-res sim, maybe even like a low res that is almost mid-res, but so I wouldn't go lower than 0.1 maybe, or maybe. So let's start with 0.1 and see what we have. I'm gonna reset the simulation. Maybe let's do 0.1 multiplied by 2.5, so we get 0.25. Let's go back. I'm just gonna check the time. Good. I'm gonna keep this under 30 minutes. I'm gonna try. So I'm gonna click on this, and this is what we have. So see, there's like so much energy that it's just running out. So currently the problem we see is these really sharp pointy edges, which actually comes from the shredding. So a very nice technique is to limit the shredding only to the fire and not have it affecting the smoke, or just generally lower the shredding value so it actually not stretching and squashing it so much. So I'm gonna go to Pyrosim in the shape, and I'm just gonna lower the shredding to something like 0.35. Go back and let's play. Okay, see, we're getting much smoother explosion, and we're actually getting these nice billowings and no more of that crazy stretching. Okay, so actually it gets pretty hot inside. Turn off the grid for a sec, and let's see, maybe we actually need to change the temperature range. So let's give it to 15. Let's go back. Now the other thing we could do, like as you can see in here, in our source, we're bringing in all the fields, getting in fuel, temperature, and velocity. And as you can see, the the fuel is actually animated as well, and for some reason, I don't know why, it starts with a standard value of 1, and then it decreases, and then it starts to grow, which gives us this fire. And it depends what you want. Like, if you want, after your explosion creates like this initial burst, if you want the emitter to stay there and continue emitting fire, this is a pretty good option to have. If you don't, then we could animate it, counter animate it, and make all the fuel just to die around maybe frame 72. So a good way to see the actual keys is to have this node selected, go to animation editor. I'm just gonna click on these two channels and see. So it looks like it's not showing me the keys. So the other way to jump into this is actually shift click, and now you could see the actual animated keys in here. So if we play it, it's weird. See, it goes to 0.7, and then it starts to decrease, and then it starts to increase. So oh, okay, now we actually see. So it probably was like a bug in the viewport. So again, if this is something you like, if you want to have fire continuing after your explosion and light up the smoke, that's totally fine. For me, I don't really like it, so maybe after frame 49, yeah, after frame 49, I'm just gonna kill the fuel. So around frame 72, I'm just gonna copy this one in case we need it. But for this one, I'm just gonna call it fuel and fuel dies off. I'm just gonna go to frame 72, and in here I'm gonna put 0. And now if I go back, I'll probably need to shift click again because there's like this weird bug. So see, we have this keyframe which is 0, but we also have these other keyframes that we don't need. So I'm just gonna select them, delete, enter. That's it. So now we obviously need to reset, but you'll see after frame 72 there's not going to be anything. You're just going to have the residual fire and smoke, and everything is going to die. Let's see. So can we go back? So there we go. The fire goes up. Still seeing some fire in there, which is weird. Oh. Looks like it's still going. Let's see again. Looks like my parameter didn't get animated. That's really weird. Okay, I'm gonna try to do this again. On frame 72, I'm gonna put this to 0, and then I'm just gonna stop this. So basically in here you can change the viewport from auto update. So basically when I scrub, it will update, to manual, so it will not update until I tell it. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go to every keyframe. I'm gonna delete it because I think there is like a bug. So if you go to keyframes, remove keyframe, in here keyframes, remove keyframe, or was it this one that we? Oh, looks like. Okay. So I actually I actually animated this one with a custom thing, and this one wasn't animated, but this one was still plugged in. So see, like, having the wrong emitter plugged in still didn't give us anything. So I'm actually gonna go back. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. I'm gonna delete this key at here. And this is the one we actually want to use. So I'm gonna have it like this, and then in here I'm gonna call it fire dies off. This is actually good that you saw this mistake, so you understand what's exactly going on. I'm gonna call it fuel dies off, and we just need to connect this one instead of that one, and let's see. Hit play. Again, another thing. This is good that you saw this because we forgot to change from manual. So now if I play, nothing updates, and you can actually see this message in here. So this is pretty useful if you just want to change the settings somewhere in here and not have your machine to calculate everything and wait for it. Okay, so I'm just gonna click from manual to auto update, and let's go. Okay, we're seeing this nice shock wave. Now ideally by frame 72 the fire should die. Like, shouldn't be emitting any more fire, and as you can see, this is exactly what happens. This residual fire is just the one that lingers there, but overall we just have smoke rising up. Okay, we'll go to camera view. So this is what we're gonna have from the camera. Okay, let's check the time. 5 more minutes. So in 5 more minutes, I'm just gonna play with this, with the colors, and maybe the resolution. I'm just gonna add some more resolution in here because this is obviously very low res. Again, like I said, anything under 1 million is pretty low res. So let's put it to 1. Go back. And let's go to the Pyro and play with some of the colors. So see, now we're getting pretty sharp edge. We're getting some really nice details inside. Now all the details are gonna get smaller. You're gonna get more interesting shapes from your explosion. So we could play with the lighting and the colors. So this actually might be a bit too much. Let me reduce the resolution a bit more. This is like a normal workflow, going back and forth and playing with the resolution, just to see what you can get for the speed and quality balance. Again, okay, so this is better. So I can still see a lot of details, but it's way faster to simulate and I don't need to wait a lot. So we start seeing the other thing that you might not see, but I already caught it. So the explosion, okay, it's maybe actually not, but sometimes your explosion moves faster than your container, and we want to actually let it breathe a bit more, so we just increase the bounds of this container, but we're gonna do it a bit later. So let's have it rise up. Okay, so frame 72, 76. Let's go to 80. Okay, I'm gonna stop at 80. I'm gonna play with some colors. So, yeah, now it's up to you as an artist which colors you wanna choose for your explosion. Like, you could go something like orange, something like brighter, less saturated yellow. You can reduce the range, you can reduce the emission scale, something like 2, and you can even have like different, you could put different colors. Like usually you could put like black in there, or like slightly dark. Something like that, maybe. and then you could put another orange. So just make, I usually have reference in front of myself and trying to match it as much as I can. Then we can play with how hot it is, and also shadow density, like the density of explosion is actually pretty high usually. So now we're starting to get something more interesting. If we go lower in range, you can see it captures like a different area. So this is, let's maybe 20. Actually do something like this. So yeah, 15 or 20, you could play with these values. I mean, it doesn't have to be like that. It could be something like this. Maybe this is what the default gives us. Okay. Let's actually rotate it around it. Maybe there's a more interesting area. I actually like this a bit more. So I'm going to create another camera just in case I need it. So yeah, I kind of like how it shoots on the side and goes up. And I'm going to create another light and rotate it minus 90 degrees. See, like we're getting way more shading now. And I'm gonna make it cool blue light. Reduce the intensity. 35. And this one, the first one, I'm gonna make almost like a sun daylight, horizon daylight. If I turn on the grid, this is what we get. You could see really nice stuff going inside. So this is it for the simulation and viewport visualization part. And in the next tutorial I will cover explosion, lighting and rendering.